What's up, everyone? In this video, I want to talk about why looking good is discouraged in South Asian culture. This is something that's been on my mind for a long time. It's not an explicit rule. No one ever says it out loud, but there's definitely an undertone. Putting effort into your appearance, caring about how you look, or focusing on anything considered superficial is often framed as irresponsible or a waste of time. And on the flip side, there's almost a kind of moral superiority attached to neglecting how you look. Some people grew up with parents who were more relaxed and chill, and they had more freedom to express themselves. Others grew up with stricter parents, where fitting into a traditional mold came with a lot more expectations and pressure. For me personally, my parents were somewhere in the middle, but they could swing either way depending on the situation, or even just how they were feeling at the time. Growing up in that kind of environment really shapes how you relate to your own appearance, often without you even realizing it. I remember being younger and, for the first time, actually looking at myself in the mirror, really noticing my appearance, thinking about the hairstyles I liked, the clothes I wanted to wear, the kind of aesthetic that felt natural to me. I'd do push-ups and crunches in my room because I wanted to be more muscular. I'd stand in front of the mirror styling my hair, and almost every time I'd get comments from my parents like, "Why are you doing that?" Or, "You're being vain." They'd say things like, "What, you think you're grown now?" Or, "Don't worry about all this stuff, you're still young." Even spending money on clothes became a problem. It was always, "That's such a waste of money. Why aren't you saving?" When I was around 15 and wanted to start going to the gym, it felt like pulling teeth just to get a membership. And trying to explain that protein powder or creatine weren't drugs, that was a whole other battle. Looking back, even though it felt restrictive at the time, I actually had it easier than a lot of my friends and relatives. Some of them faced way tighter rules and way less freedom. And for some people, the criticism went even deeper. They got bullied so much by uncles and aunties in the community that caring about their appearance started to feel embarrassing, so they just shut that part of themselves off completely. Now, all of this probably wouldn't have mattered if I grew up back home, or if I was like some of my cousins here who are more traditional and genuinely don't care about any of this stuff. If I grew up in the motherland, in an environment where everyone dressed and groomed similarly, I probably wouldn't have felt that friction. We all would have been average looking together, and that would have been normal. But growing up in the West, in a multiracial environment, that logic falls apart. On one side, I'm being discouraged from doing my hair the way I want, or wearing what I want. On the other side, I go to school and almost everyone else comes from backgrounds where physical appearance is actively encouraged. The difference is night and day. Even with the gym, I'm having loud, stressful back and forths with my parents just to get a membership. Meanwhile, kids my age have dads or older brothers pushing them to play sports or lift weights. And I think this is one of the main reasons the narrative exists that we're less physically attractive. Not because of genetics or anything like that, but because, on average, we're socialized to put way less emphasis on our appearance. In a Western environment where looks matter a lot, that puts you at a disadvantage. And that disadvantage doesn't always show up as direct insults. Sometimes it's social exclusion. Sometimes it's subtle disrespect. Sometimes it's offhand comments you don't even process until later in the day. And then you're like, wait, what was that actually about? And that's when the bigger question came up for me. If looking good isn't rewarded in our culture, then what actually is? From what I've seen growing up, the answer is pretty clear. Being focused on your appearance was often treated as a sign of immaturity. But if you looked stressed, tired, or like you were struggling, that was framed very differently. It was like, oh yeah, he's stressed because he's studying hard, or he's working nonstop. That kind of struggle was respected. It signaled seriousness. In a weird way, neglecting your appearance could actually earn you praise. Not caring how you looked made you seem more disciplined, more focused, almost morally superior. And for men especially, caring about your appearance crossed into dangerous territory. It wasn't just seen as shallow, it was often framed as feminine. So over time, a quiet message sets in. The less you care about how you look, the more mature and respectable you are. And that's when it really hit me. This way of thinking didn't come out of nowhere. My parents, my grandparents, and the generations before them went through extreme struggle just to secure the bare minimum. They grew up in environments where competition was cutthroat, and falling behind wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. That kind of environment creates a deep scarcity mindset. If you weren't using every waking moment to move your life forward, someone else was going to take your place. Hustle wasn't a personality trait, it was survival. Historically, South Asia wasn't always like this. Before colonialism, life was relatively more relaxed and community-oriented. But after colonization, poverty, instability, and pressure intensified. And with that came stricter social rules. One major theme was control. People were strongly discouraged from having children young or out of wedlock, because in a poor environment that could permanently ruin your future. Marriage became rigid, and one of the easiest ways to enforce discipline was by discouraging young people, especially boys and girls, from emphasizing their physical appearance. That's why caring about how you look often gets interpreted as trying to look grown or older than you're supposed to be. Now combine that with financial trauma, the constant fear that if you don't save every dollar, you'll end up with nothing. And you end up with a culture that quietly discourages self-expression. And honestly, that mindset makes sense in context. Imagine a household where everyone is struggling. Parents working non-stop, kids studying constantly because education feels like the only way out. And if someone does break through, they're often expected to support an entire extended family. In that environment, spending money on clothes or appearance doesn't just look unnecessary, it looks irresponsible, even if it's not their money. And the thing is, most people aren't natural-born hustlers. They were pushed into that role to prove their value to the world. The problem is, that survival mindset doesn't really update when the environment changes. Personally, I think the people who pay the price for that mismatch are the first, second, and third generations raised in the West. I grew up lower middle class, but I never went to bed hungry. I didn't experience that level of instability. Yet the restrictions and fears passed down from earlier generations still shape behavior in the diaspora. And that becomes especially limiting in a Western world where appearance and presentation carry a lot of weight. Over time, more South Asians are starting to move away from this mindset and put effort into their appearance. But depending on where you live, they're still relatively rare. So when you really take this in, this isn't about vanity or ego. A lot of the habits we inherited were survival strategies. They protected our parents and grandparents. They helped people get through genuinely hard conditions. But a strategy that helps you survive in one environment can quietly hold you back in another. Understanding where this mindset comes from isn't about disrespecting the culture. It's about recognizing when something that made sense back then doesn't fully translate anymore. And I think it's worth asking yourself, the way you relate to your appearance right now, was that a conscious choice? Or was it something you absorbed without ever questioning? Because once you realize that, the guilt around wanting to look better starts to disappear. You're not betraying anything. You're adapting. This idea is just one piece of a much bigger pattern. In future videos, I want to talk more about how this affects dating, attraction, and how South Asian men and women are perceived in Western environments. But it all starts here, understanding the difference between a survival mindset and a life that actually allows you to be seen.